Japan has just sailed a warship through the Taiwan Strait. But if you think this is a confident display of military strength, you are falling for the greatest geopolitical bluff of the decade. What happens when a global hegemon is utterly paralyzed by Middle Eastern conflicts, drowning in a $34 trillion debt crisis, and desperate enough to push its closest Asian ally directly into the line of fire? Make no mistake, this is not just a routine naval maneuver. It is a desperate distraction that will fundamentally impact global supply chains, the stability of the Indo-Pacific, and ultimately, your financial security. I am Eleanor Hayes, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we are tearing away the diplomatic smoke and mirrors to reveal the terrifying 5-layered geopolitical trap that Japan has walked into, and why the ultimate victor will not even need to fire a single shot. The recent transit of a Japanese warship through the Taiwan Strait has dominated international headlines, but analyzing this event in a regional vacuum is a profound geopolitical miscalculation. To decode the actual motivations driving this maritime maneuver, one must zoom out and examine the broader macroeconomic theater. At this very moment, the traditional centers of Western hegemony are practically paralyzed by compounding crises. Europe remains deeply entrenched in relentless, resource-draining conflicts, while the Middle East, specifically the escalating strategic friction involving the United States and Iran, is aggressively absorbing the diplomatic, financial, and military bandwidth of Washington. In stark contrast, the Asian continent, anchored by China, has managed to maintain a highly stable and lucrative environment for continued development. The economic divergence between these spheres is staggering. While the United States grapples with a spiraling sovereign debt crisis that has officially breached the $34 trillion threshold, unleashing waves of domestic financial anxiety, China has systematically cultivated an economic fortress. Beijing is currently operating with a trade surplus approaching a monumental $1 trillion. This massive accumulation of national wealth is not occurring by accident. It is being actively reinforced by an unprecedented diplomatic renaissance. In the month of April alone, Beijing hosted a continuous and diverse stream of high-level delegations. Representatives from Spain, Vietnam, and Mozambique walked the halls of the capital. They were closely followed by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, setting the stage for a highly anticipated state visit from Russian President Vladimir Putin, projected for the first half of the year. This dual dividend of rigid economic stability and magnetic diplomacy has created an undeniable gravitational pull. Global capital, historically averse to risk and conflict, is quietly but decisively fleeing the volatility of Western markets and seeking long-term refuge in the comparative safety of Asia. From the perspective of external geopolitical competitors, particularly the United States, this seamless trajectory of Chinese economic expansion is perceived not merely as a regional success story, but as a direct threat to the established financial order. The strategic calculus in Washington is cold and straightforward. When a hegemon cannot economically outcompete the stability of a rising rival, it must artificially introduce friction into that rival's environment. Breaking this strategic equilibrium has become an absolute necessity for external powers, and manufacturing a crisis in the Indo-Pacific is the most efficient mechanism to achieve it. This is exactly where Japan enters the equation. Willingly stepping into the role of the geopolitical proxy, Tokyo is attempting to inject instability into the region through calculated, symbolic provocations in the Taiwan Strait, like a deliberate tremor engineered to collapse a structurally sound bridge. This naval maneuver is less about actual military projection and entirely about shifting the tectonic plates of regional capital. When the architects of global supremacy can no longer build their own empires, they will inevitably outsource the demolition of others. Indeed, The answer lies in a simple, ruthless process of strategic elimination. When Washington surveys the Indo-Pacific for a viable proxy, the list of candidates shrinks dramatically under serious scrutiny. Take the Philippines, for instance. While Manila may frequently engage in maritime posturing, its actual naval capabilities are vastly insufficient to project the kind of sustained high-level deterrence required to challenge a superpower. Utilizing them is akin to sending a rowboat to blockade a dreadnought. India, conversely, possesses the sheer volume, yet it remains notoriously transactional. New Delhi is adept at mirroring Western diplomatic rhetoric to secure lucrative defense contracts, but it fundamentally lacks the political appetite to serve as a sacrificial vanguard in the Pacific. This process of elimination leaves only two states possessing the requisite industrial baseline and military architecture. Those are South Korea and Japan. However, South Korea is currently immobilized by a complex matrix of internal and external paralyzation. Domestically, the current administration faces fierce, systemic pushback from a powerful political opposition, led by figures like Lee Jae-myung, that is acutely aware of the economic suicide involved in decoupling from its largest trading partner. Externally, Seoul operates under the perpetual, overwhelming shadow of military deterrence from the northern half of the Korean peninsula. Any reckless adventurism orchestrated by the United States would immediately trigger an existential security crisis on its own borders. Seoul is simply too constrained to play the pawn. Thus, by sheer default, Japan emerges as the sole remaining variable. But Tokyo's willingness to execute this naval provocation is not merely about fulfilling alliance obligations, it is a symptom of severe domestic pathology. Japan is currently navigating a protracted era of industrial decay and structural economic stagnation. This decades-long economic twilight has cultivated a deeply repressed national psychology, creating an incredibly fertile environment for the resurgence of ultra-nationalist and far-right political factions. Figures within this ideological spectrum desperately require an external pressure valve to distract a disillusioned public from failing domestic policies and the crippling effects of targeted economic sanctions. When internal governance fails, fabricating an external enemy becomes the oldest survival tactic in the political playbook. Tokyo is not acting as a confident regional leader. Rather, like a fading aristocratic estate, liquidating its final heirlooms to maintain a facade of relevance. Japan is actively trading its long-term geographical security for a fleeting moment of Western validation. In the brutal calculus of great power competition, a desperate nation makes for the most compliant proxy. Furthermore, this desperation manifests not in isolated incidents, but through a highly calculated chain of provocations. We are witnessing a systematic escalation in both the diplomatic and military arenas. Consider the timing. Tokyo deliberately chose the anniversary of the signing of the Treaty of Shimonoseki, a date loaded with intense historical trauma, to execute its naval transit through the Taiwan Strait. This was a transparent exercise in psychological warfare, a blatant attempt to maximize regional irritation. Shortly after, on April 16, the Chinese embassy in Japan was subjected to a targeted remote control bomb threat alongside a series of hostile communications. Concurrently, Japanese officials initiated a deliberate diplomatic deep freeze, loudly proclaiming that China is no longer considered a vital neighbor. This effectively weaponizes their bilateral relationship as a tool for geopolitical extortion. Beyond diplomatic theatrics, the stakes are being raised with discussions surrounding the deployment of middle-range missiles, directly threatening the delicate security architecture of East Asia. This is a deliberate escalation matrix, signaling a profound strategic anxiety masquerading as assertiveness. Yet, taking a step back to view the broader historical canvas, this behavior is not an anomaly. It is, rather, a phenomenon of generational geopolitical repetition. Japan is simply the latest actor caught in the proxy trap, mirroring the recent behavior of nations like Lithuania and the Philippines, who were temporarily elevated to test the boundaries of rival powers. The driving force behind this repetition is Washington's much-publicized pivot to Asia, a grand strategy that is currently suffering from a fatal lack of execution. The United States is desperately trying to project power in the Indo-Pacific, but it finds itself violently anchored to the Middle East by the unrelenting strategic gravity of its standoff with Iran. With American military assets and political capital bleeding out in endless desert conflicts, Washington is entirely incapable of opening a second major front. Therefore, it requires a stand-in. Japan, sailing its 6,000-ton warships, is providing the illusion of Western engagement. It is a costly distraction designed to cover the retreat of a hegemon that has overextended its reach. Consequently, the most effective response to this multi-tiered provocation is not aggressive retaliation, but the art of strategic patience and normalization. In the grand chessboard of great power politics, when an opponent forces a move out of desperation, the master player simply absorbs the momentum. By refusing to engage in highly volatile direct military confrontation, China effectively neutralizes Tokyo's attempts to spark a crisis. Instead, Beijing utilizes these provocations as a legitimate pretext to permanently advance its own strategic positioning. For instance, in response to Japanese posturing, Chinese naval task forces can effortlessly normalize their transits through critical maritime choke points, like the Soya and Osumi Straits, turning previously contested waters into routine patrol routes. Economically, this dynamic allows for the precise application of export controls on essential materials. By restricting access to vital rare earth elements, Japan is forced into absurdly costly alternatives, such as attempting to mine rare earth mud 6,000 meters below the ocean surface. Strategic patience is the ultimate form of macro operation. It is about suffocating the adversary's industrial capacity while avoiding the chaos of direct conflict. Ultimately, this measured approach reveals the profound tragedy of Tokyo's current position. Japan is a nation firmly caught within a devastating five-ring geopolitical noose. The first ring is the harsh reality of military and supply chain inferiority. Faced with the undeniable deterrence of hypersonic weaponry and a total reliance on external supply chains for essential industrial components, Japan's hard power is effectively hollowed out. The second ring is the fatal energy trap. As a nation that imports 100% of its energy resources, Japan is uniquely vulnerable to the chaos in the Middle East. With Iran demonstrating zero intention of easing the pressure on the United States. Even after 8 rounds of negotiations, the prospect of an energy crisis hangs like a guillotine over the Japanese economy. The third ring is sheer financial collapse, evidenced by the freefall of the yen and a sovereign debt abyss that threatens to swallow its domestic stability. The fourth ring is an impenetrable geopolitical enclosure. To the west lies the combined weight of China and North Korea, the latter of which has explicitly labeled Tokyo as the primary catalyst for regional instability. To the north sits a heavily armed Russia. Even South Korea, technically an ally, remains a highly unpredictable variable. Finally, the fifth ring is the predatory nature of its own alliances. In the ruthless hierarchy of global hegemony, an ally is merely a resource to be extracted during times of crisis. Surrounded by these 5 inescapable realities, the ultimate endgame is already written. Drawing upon ancient strategic wisdom, the highest realization of warfare is to shatter the enemy's strategy, to win without firing a single shot. The only remaining imperative is to maintain absolute vigilance against a desperate Pearl Harbor-style anomaly. The geopolitical chessboard is fully set, but as we have seen today, the most devastating moves are the ones operating beneath the surface of military theater. When a proxy is trapped in a 5-ring noose, the era of loud provocations yielding strategic results is definitively over. Strategic patience is not inaction. It is the ultimate form of control. What are your thoughts on this shifting balance of power? Drop your insights in the comments below. Hit subscribe for more unvarnished global truths, and I will see you in the next briefing.